Bulls Show daily podcast by and for you.
All right, let's dive in. Today, we're looking at Indian space companies.
Oh, yeah.
And for this deep dive, we've got a fascinating article from the BRICS joint website. It's called Indian Space Companies, Growth in Satellite Manufacturing. Now, you might be thinking satellites, huh? But hold on.
Right.
This isn't just, rocket science for the sake of it. This is about a whole country, challenging those big names in space,
Yeah.
It's about crazy innovation.
Absolutely.
And maybe even shaking up, the entire global space economy.
Yeah. It's really interesting. We're seeing this shift, right? It used to be all about government-run space programs.
Yeah.
But now, private companies are leading the charge. And they're not just copying the big guys either.
Yeah.
They're doing things their own way.
Yeah.
And people are noticing.
Oh, they're definitely noticing, especially after that Chandrayaan-3 landing.
Oh, absolutely.
Landing on the moon's south polar region. That's the area around the moon's south pole was huge.
Yeah. It was massive. Yeah. Not just for India, but for the whole private space sector.
Totally. And it's not just about planting a flag, right?
No.
It's about showing everyone what they can do.
Yeah, it was a statement. I mean, landing on the lunar South Pole.
Yeah.
Talk about a tough spot, super challenging terrain, lighting's all crazy.
Yeah.
And they nailed it. That puts India in a very exclusive club.
Totally. And this success, this wasn't just a fluke.
No, not at all.
It's kick-started everything in India's private space industry.
It's like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly investors are interested. Talented engineers are flocking to these startups.
Yeah.
There's this energy, like a real sense of momentum.
Totally. And it's put these private companies on the map.
Oh, yeah.
They're not just dreamers anymore. They're players.
They're proving themselves.
They're getting things done. Okay, so the article talks about this idea of small is the new big when it comes to satellites.
Okay.
So what's that all about?
So traditionally, satellites, those were huge, complicated, and man, were they expensive to build and launch.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing this move towards smaller, more agile spacecraft. We're talking satellites the size of a laptop.
A laptop in space. That's amazing. But why the change? Why smaller all of a sudden?
Well, a few reasons. For one, smaller satellites are way cheaper to build and launch.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, they can be upgraded faster. And in this business, tech is always changing.
Right. Got to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly. That agility is a big advantage.
So it's kind of I don't know, like a giant cruise ship versus a bunch of speedboats.
Ooh.
The cruise ship is impressive, sure. But those speedboats, they can go anywhere, adapt quickly.
I love that analogy. And this shift, it's shaking things up in the space industry. And Indian companies, they're leading the charge.
Yeah, and, this whole smaller, cheaper, faster thing.
Yeah.
It kind of fits with that cheap and cheerful philosophy you see a lot in India, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about making the most of what you have, finding creative solutions without spending a fortune.
Resourceful, right. And that's giving Indian companies a real edge.
Yeah, they're proving that space exploration doesn't have to cost $1 billion.
Right. But it's not all just scrappiness and ingenuity. The Indian government's in on this too, right?
Big time. The government is really committed to growing this private space sector.
Yeah.
They've even set up a venture fund, basically a big pool of money, specifically to support these startups. We're talking $119 million.
Wow, that's serious money.
They're not messing around. They want India to be a major player in the space industry.
And it's not just talk. The money's actually flowing.
Oh, yeah. In 2023 alone, investments in Indian space companies shot up to $126 million.
So who are the big names, the ones driving this growth? The article mentions a bunch.
Yeah.
Bellatrix Aerospace, Pixel, Agnico Cosmos, Dhruva Space.
Yeah, all building and launching their own satellites.
Yeah, all doing their own thing. Then there's Satsure. They're using
Oh, Satsure. They're interesting.
Earth remote sensing data, which is basically info gathered by satellites
Right.
to make Indian airports run better.
Exactly. Optimizing runway use, predicting delays, even helping prevent them.
That's amazing, space tech actually impacting our daily lives.
It's not just about science for science's sake. It's about solving real problems.
Exactly. And then there's Skyroot.
Oh, can't forget Skyroot.
They launched the first ever private Indian rocket back in 2022.
Historic moment, solidified India's place in the space race.
Huge achievement. And it's just incredible how fast these companies are moving, innovating.
It's like they're not just talking about the future, they're building it.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got all this buzz, all this activity in the Indian space sector, but let's zoom out for a second.
Okay.
Right now, India has a pretty small slice of the global commercial space market.
Right.
Just 2%, actually.
Yeah, just 2%.
Might not sound like much, but
But think about it. A few years ago, there was practically nothing. That 2% is a huge jump, and it's only going up. Some experts are saying India could grab 10% of the market by 2030.
wow, that's 5 times bigger.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're starting small, but the potential is massive.
That's
But that kind of growth, that's going to bring a whole new set of challenges. Right?
Oh, for sure. As these companies get bigger, they'll have to deal with international regulations, competition from companies that have been around forever,
Yeah.
and they have to keep innovating just to stay ahead.
Right. It's a wild ride.
It's dynamic, it's challenging, but man, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, it's like they're figuring it out as they go.
Yeah.
Exciting, but kind of scary too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But that's what makes the Indian space sector so cool. They're not afraid to try new things.
Right. They adapt, they find a way.
And they get results. We've talked about the companies, the tech, the investments.
Right.
But what about, like, the average person?
Yeah.
The person who's never going to launch a rocket,
Yeah, good point.
How does all this space stuff actually affect them?
That's a really important question because what happens in space, it trickles down in ways we don't even realize. Think about it. Space technology is behind so much of what we rely on.
Yeah, I guess.
Communications, navigation, knowing what the weather's going to be like,
Right.
even disaster management.
Okay, yeah, but those things always seem kind of, I don't know, far away.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example, like a real world example of how these Indian companies are making a difference in people's lives?
Let's go back to Satcher. Remember them?
Yeah.
Using satellite data to make airports run better. That's not just about efficiency. It's about saving people time, less stress, smoother travel.
So like less delays, shorter lines.
Exactly. Imagine getting through the airport without a headache.
Okay, now that I can get behind. So it's not just about science and exploration.
Well-
It's about using that space tech to actually make things better down here.
Exactly. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And as these companies keep pushing the limits, we're going to see even more creative ways to use space tech.
Cool. The space industry, it's always felt like this big competition.
Yeah.
Countries fighting to be the best, the first, the most powerful.
It's that classic space race like the U.S. and the Soviets back in the day.
Exactly. Biggest rockets, bravest astronauts, that kind of thing.
All about national pride and showing off your tech.
Right. So now that we've got all these private Indian companies, are we seeing a new kind of space race? This time with companies instead of countries.
That's the interesting part. National pride, that's always going to be there.
Yeah.
But these private companies, especially in countries like India, they're changing the game.
So maybe it's less about winning and more about working together.
That's what we might see. Private companies, they want to make money. And that often means finding ways to collaborate.
Share resources, that kind of thing.
Exactly. We're already seeing joint ventures, companies sharing launch facilities, even working together on research.
That's awesome. Instead of fighting over space, we could all work together to explore it.
It's a much more peaceful and honestly a more inspiring vision.
Right. Okay, so we got to be realistic.
Of course.
There's always going to be some competition.
Yeah, that's just how it works.
But these private companies, especially in places like India,
Yeah.
they're shaking things up.
They're changing the rules.
And we get to watch it happen. It's kind of historic.
Absolutely. Front row seats to a revolution in space.
I like that. What's really cool is how these private companies are making space, like, more accessible.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
What do you mean by that?
It used to be that only governments and these huge corporations could afford to play in space.
Yeah.
But with these Indian companies driving down costs, making things more affordable,
Right.
it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
So you're saying that one day, even small companies or like research groups could launch their own satellites.
Exactly. Imagine universities, nonprofits, even individual scientists doing their own thing in space.
That's great.
They could run experiments, gather data, test new tech, all in space.
Wow.
That's the kind of power we're talking about, space for everyone.
That's amazing. It's like space is the ultimate level playing field.
And that's incredibly exciting. It means the next big space discovery could come from anywhere, from anyone. The old barriers, they're coming down. And that's great for innovation, for science, for everyone.
It really feels like we're at the beginning of something huge in space, Like anything is possible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But before we get too lost in the stars, let's come back down to Earth for a minute and recap what we've learned about these Indian space companies.
Okay, sounds good.
We started with that article, Indian Space Companies, Growth in Satellite Manufacturing from the BRICS joint website.
Right.
And man, what a story, right? India's space industry is just exploding, all thanks to these awesome private companies.
Yeah, they're really shaking things up.
Totally. They're not afraid to do things differently, cheaper, faster, They're all about that small is the new big idea.
Yeah, small satellites, quick turnarounds, constantly innovating.
And they're doing it all with that classic Indian cheap and cheerful attitude.
Exactly. Making the most of what they've got, finding creative solutions.
And we can't forget about the Indian government. They're a big part of this, too.
Oh, absolutely. They're putting their money where their mouth is, supporting these companies, creating opportunities.
It's a great example of how the government and private companies can work together to make amazing things happen.
Couldn't agree more. But it's not just about the tech, right? The space revolution, it's about more than just rockets and satellites.
Right. It's about making life better for everyone.
Exactly. These companies are coming up with solutions to some of the biggest challenges we face.
Like what?
Well, think about better communication networks, keeping an eye on climate change, responding to disasters, even connecting people in remote areas.
Wow, space tech can do all that.
It's incredible, right? The possibilities are endless.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway? What do we want people to remember about these Indian space companies?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. We often think of space as this competition between countries. Who's got the biggest rocket? Who's going to get to Mars first?
Right, like that old space race.
Exactly. But with these private companies, especially in places like India that are really stepping up their space game, we might be seeing a shift.
A shift to what?
To a more collaborative, more business-minded approach to space.
So less about winning and more about working together.
Exactly. It could change everything about how we explore space.
It's like a whole new chapter in the space story, and we're watching it unfold right now.
It's pretty exciting. And, these companies, they're not just reaching for the stars. They're inviting everyone along for the ride.
What do you mean?
They're showing us that space isn't just for governments and giant corporations anymore. It's becoming more accessible, more diverse, more open to everyone.
That's awesome.
It is. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see an Indian astronaut on Mars or a small startup launching a satellite that changes the world.
That would be incredible.
Right. So next time you look up at the night sky,
Yeah.
remember, something amazing is happening up there, a new era of space exploration, and India is leading the way.
I love it. Well, that's it for our deep dive into the world of Indian space companies.
Hope you enjoyed it.
We had a blast, and we hope you learned something new.
Keep looking up.
And keep dreaming big.